always happy and excited. Today's a great day. It's beautiful outside, but apart from that, we get to come together and celebrate what a wonderful life we live. To celebrate Jesus and the sacrifice that He made for all of us. But in another way, I'm kind of sad. I don't know if you realize it or not, but this Wednesday will be September the 11th. And for many, that marks a very sad time, as well as it should. There was a song that came out. Alan Jackson, I believe, was the one who wrote the song. Shortly after the attacks on September 11th, where were you when the world stopped turning? There was a bunch of songs that came out shortly after that, but this one really stuck with me because the words were somewhat moving, and whether you like Alan Jackson or country music or whatever, the words definitely spoke to us at that time, the people that were hurting. This morning, I want us, 12 years after the fact, to look at something. We could study about those that selflessly gave their lives to hurt others they didn't even know. This morning, we could look at those that selflessly gave their lives to help those they didn't even know. We could look at numerous things about this to try to remember those that had given their lives and lost their lives. However, I thought we would take a little different approach. The title of this morning's lesson is Peace in a Troubled World. All around us, we don't see peace. It's somewhat depressing just to watch the news, because it seems like every time we turn on the news, something bad's happening. Whether it be accidental, intentional, an objective amount of malice involved, whatever it might be, there's just always bad news. How can we find peace in a troubled world? Specifically, in view of the remembrance that will be coming up this Wednesday, in a world where there is so much pain and suffering and hate and injury, how can we find peace? And that's going to be our task this morning. If you want to go ahead and turn over your Bibles to the 46th Psalm, that is going to be our text for this morning. We're going to look at the first 5 verses specifically in connection to this, but we're going to jump around to a few other places as well. Peace is relative. What we consider peaceful here would not be considered peaceful in the Sudan. What we consider peaceful here in this particular part of Missouri, America, would not be considered peaceful in other places, like maybe East St. Louis, or various other places of similar description and reputation. Peace is very relative. So, when we're talking about peace in a troubled world, that's going to be relative to what kind of peace we're talking about. Are we talking about a ceasefire in a time of war? Are we talking about a peace that brings prosperity, the Pachamama, that great Roman period where there was peace and prosperity? Are we going to be talking about a peace that means that everybody's getting along and not fighting and arguing, just happy to be around each other? The peace that we're going to be talking about this morning goes a little deeper than that, and it means so much more than that. If you will, read with me Psalm 46, the first 5 verses. I'm going to have the verses up here on the screen beside me, although it seems it's going to be cut off a little bit, so you might want to follow along in your Bibles as well, as I always encourage you to do. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble as it swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. Thank you for following along with me. This morning, for our memory points, I have a couple of questions for us. First, are you afraid? Second, where is God? And third, are you safe? Now, these questions, much like the definition of peace, are going to be relative to how we define them. How do you define fear? How do you define God's presence? What are you talking about there? Are you talking about Him standing right next to me? Are you talking about Him being there? Are you talking about His protection? It's going to be relative to what we mean by safe. But I hope that as we study through each of these, we'll get a good idea of what God's promises, what we can enjoy, and hopefully we'll find peace, even in the midst of a very troubled, very violent world. First question, are you afraid? Well, the natural thing we would ask is, should I be afraid? Should I fear anything? And let me just first start off with saying, yes, it's completely natural for you to be afraid. If you were not afraid, then I would be wondering what was wrong. Marty and I were getting our haircut yesterday, in case you haven't noticed. I don't say that just to tell you every little detail about my life. There's actually a point to this. We were getting our haircut yesterday, and the particular place we went, it's a place in Club that Marty goes a lot. There was all kinds of quotations on the wall, and most of them had particular people that was the point of it, mainly the Duke. And it was a very country-themed, Western theme, but one in particular caught my eye. Here, the Duke, it was quoted as saying, courage was being very scared. I'm paraphrasing clinical language a little bit, but saddling up anyway. I saw that, and it just kind of made me step back for a second. Even someone we see as being very brave, as being very courageous, admitted there's fear there. But once again, that fear is relative. What kind of fear are we talking about? Is it a reaction to stimulus around us? I see something and that makes me afraid? If so, then yes, as I said, we're all going to have fear. We're all going to be afraid. But if I define fear a little differently, if fear is not only the immediate reaction I have, but once I've gathered myself and once I've thought it through a little bit, once my head's a little clearer, how I feel about it, if I continue in fear, if that is a definition of how I feel about a subject, then that makes it a little different. We're not talking about a knee-jerk reaction. We're not talking about how you naturally feel out of danger to yourself, perhaps. We're talking about something deeper. Turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7 with me. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. I've got it on the screen here too, but for some reason technology is not cooperating with me this morning, so I would once again encourage you to turn along as well in your Bible. Here, Paul's writing to his son in the faith, someone who is out on their own, trying to fill some pretty big shoes. Can you imagine being, I'm going to use the word a disciple of Paul. Now, ultimately, he was a disciple of Paul, as Paul was a disciple of Jesus. He was ultimately a disciple of Jesus. But he was representing Jesus and Paul at the same time. He was someone who had been traveling around with Paul. When he would went somewhere, they would say, that's Timothy, the guy that travels with Paul. Those are some pretty big shoes to fill. Well, here he is, trying to be a good soldier for God. Trying to adequately represent Jesus. And as a young man. And here's some encouraging words that Paul gives in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Now, the context of this, if you back up one verse, Paul has just reminded him to fan into flame the gift of God that he was given. He was saying, use the gift that you have. Don't be afraid to do that. Why? Because that's not the kind of spirit that God has given us. Now, here, spirit doesn't mean specifically what's inside of you and what we often think of when we think of a ghost. This is more of a description of the attitude and the personality of a person. If I say someone has a happy spirit, what I'm saying is that that's their demeanor. Well, here, God's saying, I haven't given you that demeanor. And it might even be tied a little bit to that deeper meaning. Because of the Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, we don't have that same reason to be afraid. But I digress. We're going on a little ahead of ourselves. Let's ask another question. Perhaps an even more important question. Why am I afraid? What has caused me to have fear? Because I'm a firm believer in not treating symptoms. Because if you treat the symptoms, the problem will still be there underneath. You have to go to the heart of the problem and tackle the real issue, and then the symptoms will dissipate. They won't be a problem. Well, in 1 John chapter 4, in verse 18, John doesn't deal with all the little symptoms here. He cuts right to the heart of the problem and identifies what the issue is. Now let me underscore again what I said a moment ago. This is not an attack on you having a knee-jerk reaction to fear. This is a charge to overcome that fear. John says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. It must have been pretty scary to be Jesus. Can you imagine standing before Pilate, the tribunal there, the seat of judgment, where he would either be granted life or death? Now, can you imagine going a step further, already knowing that the verdict's going to be guilty? And then being asked that question by Pilate. Do you hear what they're saying about you? Do you have nothing to say for yourself? Being asked by Pilate, are you the king of the Jews? And replying, you said so. Can you imagine how scary that would have been? It was fearful enough that the night before when Jesus was praying, he was under so much stress that the capillaries bursted and he actually sweat blood. It's an actual medical condition when you're undergoing such stress. He knew what kind of pain there would be. But something made him persist through that fear. See, fear and reacting to that fear by letting it overpower you, giving into it, there's a cause for that. It's a lack of love. Now, you may get defensive here and say, well, I love God. Don't say that's why I'm afraid. But notice he gives a qualifier. Perfect love casts out fear. If I have a hope in Jesus that transcends this physical life, that even if my life here ends, I have a reward to look forward to. If I have the mindset that Paul had, that if I go on to be with the Lord, great. If I continue here, then that's more service I get to render. If I have that kind of an attitude, am I really going to be afraid of punishment? I wouldn't. I'm not saying it's easy. But I am saying it's a lot easier than what Jesus did for us. And that's why. That's the reason. Why am I afraid? Because I've not attained perfect love yet. Well, that's fine and good, Jacob, but what do I do about that? It's okay to tell me that I don't love God or love Jesus or love the idea of having an eternal life with God enough to suffer yet. That doesn't help me in my present situation. Right again. Turn over with me to the 56th Psalm. Because it doesn't help you at all to know a problem if there's never a solution offered. Let's find a solution. Psalm 56 in verse 3 reads, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Now this is interesting. This is a psalm that David wrote when the Philistines seized him in Gath. He had a very real and present danger to his life. Do you remember the story of David and Goliath? Do you know what nationality Goliath was? He was a Philistine. Do you know who David was famous for fighting over and over and over and over again? I'll give you another hint. It was the Philistines. When David had to get a bride price for his wife, Michal, and he had to go collect all of those foreskins, do you know what kind they were? Philistines. David and the Philistines didn't have the best relationship. In fact, when the people described David and Saul and their war on the Philistines, they would say, Saul's killed his thousands and David killed his 10,000s. David had a pretty good reason to be afraid. But what was his response to that fear? When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. Sometimes people will tell me, well, Jacob, this is just too much. First thing I remind them is, God's never given you anything that's too much for you to bear. The only problem is you may be trying to bear it alone. He has never given us too much to bear because we can cast our worries on Him. We can put my trust in you. We can rely on Him to bear the hard burden. There's been plenty of things that were too hard for me to bear alone. I'm just so happy that I had someone to help me through it. Someone that's a lot stronger than me. Someone with angel armies. Someone who created the entire universe that I can put my trust in when I'm afraid. The second question that I told you I wanted us to talk a little bit about this morning. Where is God? Now this is a really common charge that people give. And you may have seen something recently on Facebook. It's gone viral. And it's of a man at the dentist. And this dentist, through conversation, comes about that he doesn't believe in God. And he gives this reason why. If God was real, why would there be so much evil, pain, and suffering in the world? And this patient asks his dentist a very good question. Why are there so many people with bad teeth? And the dentist replied, I can't help it if they don't come to me and let me help them. Let me make them better. But the patient had made his point. Why is there so much evil, pain, and suffering and evil people in the world? God can't help it with man having free will if they choose not to come to Him. If they choose not to listen to what He has to say, take His advice and take His help to be a better person, it's not His fault. We can easily understand that when it comes to this dentist story. So why is there so much evil, pain, and suffering in the world? Because man has the ability to choose. The greatest blessing we've ever been given by God, our free will, can be our greatest curse. Because the way that God put it after the flood, when He told Noah that He would never again destroy the whole world with water because of man, was that because man's intentions were evil from his youth. That's a pretty bad description. Being told that even when you're young, you've just got bad intentions. You're corrupt. And it's not worth punishing the entire world over you. Did you ever have that kind of situation when you were little, maybe in school? Little nerd? Whenever we were at school, I can remember one student doing something wrong, and so the whole class got punished. Well, that's not fair. In fact, I can remember, my grandmother's here with me this morning, I can remember when we would all misbehave, the grandkids, she would say, well, I don't know exactly which one started, so I'll just spank you all, that way I know I get the right one. I didn't think that was very fair either. Ultimately, what God decided was that man was so bad, it wasn't worth punishing the whole world for what man had done. That he would never again destroy all of creation just because of man's badness. Where is God? Who is it that he's protecting? That's a better question. Because when people ask this question, they assume that our lives should be filled with rainbows and sunshine and fuzzy things. There should be no happiness. If God truly loved us, then he would give us everything we ever wanted. The question we need to ask here is, who is he protecting? Because we get some misguided views on this. Especially living in such a great nation as we live in. Not seeing some of the poverty and destruction that are present in other parts of the world. So much so that when something happens, like the tragedy that happened on September 11, 2001, that we wonder, where'd God go? We might have had the misconception that God only blesses America. And that he's chosen America to be his chosen people. You see, that's not an uncommon belief. Not only here, but for other places around the world. In fact, the Jews had this idea. At one time, they were God's chosen people. But then when Jesus came and they rejected him, in fact, before that, if you look at Jeremiah 31 through 34, there Jeremiah is predicting beforehand, before Jesus ever walked this earth, that there would come a time where the nation of Israel wouldn't be it anymore. There would be this new nation where God would write the law on their hearts. You wouldn't have to teach your neighbor to know the Lord. Once that the Jews had to teach their children to know the Lord, but they were already a part of the nation of Israel. They were already part of God's people. Well, there would come a time where you wouldn't be born into God's people in that sense. Not before you know about Him. When Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, he said you'd have to be born again. Nicodemus didn't understand either. He said, how can I crawl back into my mother's womb and be born again? He said, it's the water and the Spirit. That's how Jesus proclaimed it. It's going to be different. Look over at Galatians chapter 6 and verse 16. Who is God's chosen people? Who is it that He's protecting? Who is He watching out for? Whose side is He on, you might say? And as for all who walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them, and upon the Israel of God. Now this is a very important verse, one you might want to mark back in the back of your mind, because a lot of our Christian friends still put a lot of stake in physical Israel. And they believe that God's going to come back and set up Israel all over again. This is actually something that has come about in the last several hundred years to become very popular in Christianity. And it completely goes against Jesus coming in the first place. There would have been any purpose for it. After all, when Peter preached the first gospel sermon as a fact in Acts chapter 2, that was his whole point. You crucified him. The very people he came to. And then he quotes the prophet Joel, who said that everyone, not just the Jews anymore, but everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And he tells them how to do it. They say, what are we going to do? He said, here's what you have to do. You have to repent. You have to be baptized. And then you're living a different life. Paul brings out a little more Romans chapter 6, but we'll look at that a little bit later. The Israel of God. You see, these individuals who take this view of Israel today, physical Israel, they really don't like this verse. In fact, if you look at their commentaries, their study Bibles, when they get here, they'll do a lot of really funny things that don't make any sense. They really don't like this verse at all. Because they like to separate the Israel of God and God's chosen people from the church. But they're one and the same. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 and following. That's really one huge run-on sentence that Paul has there. And he describes how God chose us in Christ from the foundation of the world. That's where the spiritual blessings are. They're not found in Israel. They're found in Christ. You see, way back at the time of Abraham, God promised Abraham, your seed, singular word there, referring to Jesus. Through that seed, he would bless all the nations of the world. Who's he protecting? Where does he dwell? See, along the same mindset, these individuals think God dwells in a temple. Where is God? Paul tells the church of Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, in verse 16 and 17, that he dwells in them. It's interesting because Paul uses this same argument when he's talking to people in Athens. God doesn't dwell in temples and made with hands, to show them as well that their idols, their false gods, weren't correct. He was describing the real God to them. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 and 17 reads, "Do you not know that you are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple." Where does God dwell? God dwells in His people, in His church, in His temple. When Moses was on the mountain, God told him, "Make these after the pattern for them, being shown you on the mountain." The Hebrew writer quotes that and brings out that that pattern is made alive in the church. It was a shadow of what was coming that would be greater. Where's God? Where does He dwell? He doesn't dwell in a temple made with hands. We talked about that just a moment ago in Acts. When he was in Acts, he doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. What did He say exactly? And the reason I ask this question is because Jesus told the people that He would give them this sign. He would destroy that temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Now I say that temple on purpose because that's what they heard. They heard the temple in Jerusalem. But what He said was this temple. Here's when they're actually trying to bear a false witness at the trial of Jesus. They said, "We heard Him say, I'll destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another not made with hands." It's interesting they add that little extra. Now their testimonies didn't line up against them. They're still admitted, contrary to the law of the day. But that's interesting. Where's God? Even they realized that Jesus was saying, He's not going to dwell in a temple that's made with hands. He doesn't dwell in this building. He doesn't dwell in this building that we built. God built everything. He made the entire universe. This isn't the church. The people in here. It's the church. It's where He dwells. Where's God? In Matthew 16, verse 18. If you're in our Wednesday night class, I hope you remember exactly what verse that is. We hit on that pretty hard last Wednesday. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. After Peter makes this great confession that Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus said, "You're Peter. And on that rock, that confession you just made, I'm going to build my church." Where's God? He's not the temple that was made with hands. He's in the church that He built. Last question that I want us to talk about this morning. Are you safe? That's a question that we should ask. Now, as I said a minute ago, safe was relative. What are we talking about when we say safe? Well, in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 and 11, Jesus is going through the Beatitudes. Blessed is this, blessed is this, blessed is this. Let's read what He says in verse 10. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." It doesn't sound like the happy, fluffy Christianity that we see on TV. Jesus said, be happy when people persecute you, revile you. That's where you're going to be blessed. Why? Did you notice For theirs is the kingdom of the earth. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Are you safe? Depends on who you define safe. Would you rather be safe here or safe in something that will last? The Hebrew writer, when he's describing the kingdom that we've come to, the city that God has built, he says not one that can be shaken. The idea is that an earthquake, if hard enough, if strong enough, could destroy a city built with hands here on this earth. But the city that God has built, it's not like that. It's not anything that can be shaken. It's not anything that can be destroyed. It's not anything that's going to grow old. In Luke chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, Jesus warned them. He warned them not to be afraid of those who can only hurt your body. You see, that's the next question. What can they do? Verses 4 and 5 says, I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. What can they do? All they can do is kill me. Now, that sounds pretty bad. Even to me, I don't want to die. In one sense, I don't want to die at all. Knowing that I'll go to heaven, that's a great incentive. But I like being alive. I like living. I like enjoying the blessings that God has made for me. But I like something else more. But I warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed you, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. God has real power. The only thing people on this earth can do to me is kill me. But if I'm not a friend of God, as we talked about in Bible class this morning, great lesson that Terry gave me, if I'm not looking to him for security, he won't provide security for me. I'll have to answer for the bad things I've done. Are you safe? What can they do? Can they snatch them out of the Father's hand? Now, this verse is sometimes used incorrectly to say that someone cannot fall from grace, which makes absolutely no sense when Paul says in Galatians, once you've gone back to a system of works, merited works, he uses the exact phrase, you've fallen from grace. That's preposterous. Doesn't even make sense. It's saying exactly against what God says can't happen. What this verse does say, however, is that if you're here in Jesus' hand, in God's hand, if you're abiding in him, Satan can't come and take you away against your will. He's not able to overpower God in any way. Can you walk out of his hand and decide you don't want this anymore? Yeah. When you're in his hand, nobody can take you from that. They can kill your body, but that's all they can do. That's all the power they have. I have one last scripture I want us to look at this morning. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Paul here is addressing some close friends of his, people that he feels very close to. They've been in partnership with him in the works that he's done in the mission works from the very beginning. And he tells them not to be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. He didn't promise that you would never have pain and suffering. He didn't promise that evil people would decide to do evil things. He promised that in the midst of that, you can have peace. Because our peace rests in something more than what's physical here. Leaves me with a question. You can't quite see the question mark on there, but I promise you it's there. Are you at peace? Are you currently feeling peaceful? I'm not asking if you ever feel fear, because, as we've already said, it's a natural reaction to a scary situation. But in the midst of the storm that's raging around you, have you found peace? We talked about Peter speaking in Acts 2 earlier. Those people weren't at peace. They'd just been told the Messiah, the Christ that you've been looking for, you just crucified him. They weren't at peace at all. They were so unpeaceful. They felt so much of a lack of peace. They said, what are we going to do? Peter told them, you've got to appeal to the one you killed. He said, call on the name of the Lord. And he told them how to do it. It's the same thing that Ananias told Paul. Paul, who we may know as Saul as well, another form of his name, been persecuting the church, killing Christians. He's met on the road to Damascus by Jesus, and Jesus said, why are you persecuting me? He said, who are you, Lord? He said, I'm Jesus. Well, then you're persecuting. And he goes into the city of Damascus, and he prays. He prays. He prays. I can't imagine what's going through his mind. But if I had to guess, it'd be something about the religion that he's devoted himself to so fully, being in error, finding out that the very God he was trying to serve he'd been persecuting, the very Christ he'd been looking forward to, he'd helped kill. He wasn't at peace. Ananias came to him and said, why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized, washing away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Told him to do the same thing. Appeal to the same God you've been persecuted. Because he's gracious, he's merciful. He wants to give you peace. If you'd like peace this morning, won't you come right now together?